Welcome into the Inside Bassmaster Podcast, episode 81 here. I'm your host, Ronnie Moore. My co-host, as always, Kyle Jessie, the digital content editor of Bassmaster.com. Let's just be honest. If you guys are loving the podcast, please drop a review, rate it 5 stars or 4 stars. If you think we're doing a terrible job, rate it 2 stars, 3 stars, whatever you want. But just drop a rating and a review. We were kind of revamped the podcast for 2022. It's been a couple years since we had an episode, so we'd love to get some fresh feedback there. If you're watching it on YouTube or Bassmaster.com, like and subscribe. We appreciate all the feedback as we try to get all the interviews with the pros, different tips and techniques, and kind of stay up to date weekly with what's going on at Bassmaster in the world of fishing. So, Kyle, we just knocked out the 6th stop of the Bassmaster Elite Series season, and Brandon Lester was our champion at Pickwick. It took over 20 pounds a day to get the victory. What were your initial thoughts? Because you got to stay pretty close to your new home in Alabama to go to this event, but Pickwick's a place that you still probably don't have as many days on the water as other Alabama lakes. So you got to see this lake in action in the prime of summer.
Yeah, and definitely that side of the lake. Obviously, Florence is going to be the closer end to Birmingham, of course, but getting to see that end of the lake, see kind of the middle section down to the dam, it's really interesting. And as to be expected, every single day on the water, and you probably saw it on Bassmaster Live as well, you just run up the main river and you'd see a wad of boats here, a wad of boats there, a wad of boats there. Like the first 2 days, you could literally just run down the river and see probably half the field just in that middle section of the lake. Obviously, we had some guys do really well running further than that, and then guys, like Chris Aldane staying closer to the dam. So it spread out pretty well. I mean, I think Pickwick is always talked about as being one of those places where ledge fishing's good. There's just only so many spots where those fish get. It's something you heard Brandon Polnick talk a little bit about, trying to find those sneaky places, but kind of just not able to do it. But Brandon Lester was one of the few that was able to find those sneaky spots. I'm sure we'll get into that more, and you got to see that way more than I did because I didn't get to cover him on the water. But I'm interested to hear, more about, what he was doing, because I've got to watch some of the highlights, but I never got to see it on the water. So I'm a little anxious to know myself.
We will get with Brandon Lester today and talk to him very shortly, hopefully, while we're going to bother him on his beach vacation. I mean, I know they already had that beach vacation planned, but talk about the swag and the style points of winning an elite event, putting the trophy in the truck and going straight to the beach. I mean, it sounds like it's spontaneous, but the Lesters had that planned, and they maybe had it planned to go on Sunday or Saturday, and he just hung around and kept on fishing. And so we'll get into that with Brandon Lester as well. But you did get to see some sneaky stuff. You covered Jacob Fouts. What's interesting is seeing some of the areas that factored on Pickwick. Like you mentioned, Chris Zaldane in that State Line Island region. What's funny is all of the slang terms of areas that we used to talk about in the college series, we got to see, because in the college series, we would launch down in Alabama, like you said, and it was a long run to get to certain areas. And then it was an even longer run to get to some of the more inconspicuous places. Well, we were taking off in Counts, Tennessee. That was a host this week for the Whataburger Bassmaster Elite. And we were just a few minutes from some of those inconspicuous places. So we got to see some of the ones that, for an 18-foot boat that's got like 30 gallons of gas in it, I can't go all the way to State Line Island or Yellow Creek. And I'd have to get gas somewhere to come back for tournaments. So seeing it flopped around was cool. We got to see Bay Springs come into play with John Cox and Tyler Rivette and some of those guys. Skylar Hamilton, biggest bass of the event came from Rivette from Bay Springs. Some of the biggest bags of the event came from John Cox down there. No surprise. Our Angler of the Year race, still hot as can be. We thought it might cool down a little bit as we went deeper and more offshore, but John Cox, hey, he will survive. But like I mentioned, Bear Creek was an area that we see a lot of guys normally fish, because it's kind of that main river drag up through the Natchez Trace Bridge, through Waterloo. The river turns, and then when it goes to turn back towards Tennessee, Bear Creek sticks off to your left. If you're coming towards Tennessee, it's on your left, and there's a huge, big, flat point area kind of where there's a lot of different contour changes around that, where the main river meets the channels. And we got to see Jacob Fouts get a little sneaky with it. And then we also got to see Cody Huff around some places, but very pleased overall with Pickwick. It's my favorite lake in the world. Other than my home lake, it is my favorite lake. And we got to see dam to dam fish catches this week.
Yeah, it was really interesting. And like you said, with Jacob Fouts, you saw with guys like Matt Robertson, You can attest to this. Maybe Lester, some of these guys were making a lot of moves in the day. Obviously, if you didn't graph over a school and see them or catch one pretty much instantly, you were pretty much, running and gunning and fishing new areas. I covered Jacob Fouts 2 days of the tournament and passed him the other 2 days. He never moved. I mean, he literally fished one spot and just fished it, all the way around, different angles, different baits, and made it work for 4 days. Obviously, super impressive finish. And then also one thing I think, needs to be talked about more is something you brought up with John Cox, being able to make what he did work, although he just completely went against the grain as he does so often, and is able to keep, the Angler of the Year race as tight as it really can be at this point, as well as Polnick is doing. His season at this point kind of speaks for itself. It's pretty incredible. But for John Cox to keep hanging around, even though the tournaments, if you look at them, you think are going away from his strength, and he's still right there. So really impressive from him. It'll be interesting to see once we go up to smallmouth country, because that's where it gets a little more dicey. It's hard to go against the grain up there in a certain sense, but yeah,
you're going to be able to see John catch him shallow smallmouth at the St. Lawrence and maybe Ontario, but Oahe, I don't think they're going to be shallow. And then the Mississippi River is a place that he's done well, but so has Brandon Polnick. So it'll be very interesting. But Kyle, without further ado, why don't we just go ahead and get our champion, Brandon Lester, in the call and talk to him for a few minutes, and then let him get his toes back in the sand. So I'm gonna add Brandon Lester to the deal, and we're just so excited to steal a couple minutes of his time away for this. And so Brandon's getting connected here before he turns his phone sideways, and then we'll be able to talk to him for just a few minutes. Brandon, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can. Your phone is sideways for you, but it's vertical for us. So I don't know if you just do it again and then flip it again.
Let's see.
Boom.
Magic.
Magic. There it is. Oh my gosh. Give us a view of that background, Brandon.
There you go.
Oh my gosh. We talked about it just a minute ago, and I said to Kyle, I said, I'm not sure if that might be the most like style points we've ever seen from an elite champion, just riding the trophy to the beach. And I know you already had the beach planned, but if you didn't tell us you had the beach planned, it would have just looked like major style points.
Yeah, it would. This has definitely been planned for a while. It just kind of worked out, but it was pretty neat. I have not taken the blue trophy down on the actual beach yet.
Oh, you got to get a pic of that.
I'm gonna get a picture of that before I leave here for sure.
That's awesome.
I imagine that'll get some sideways looks from some folks not understanding what the heck is going on.
I'm sure it will, but we'll fill them in.
Yeah, there'll be some I know with the Lester crowd, it's not gonna be long before you let them know, and there'll be some people walking around in hook hats, no doubt, understanding that what that big blue trophy is. But yeah, you said the beach trip's been planned for a long time. Well, I think that this Bassmaster Elite Series victory has been planned for a long time for Brandon Lester. It was just a matter of time before you knocked it out of the park. You've been close so many times, man, and to do it at the only other lake I'd probably say is if we randomly went to Tim's Ford on the Elite Series, or if you were at Gunnersville. I mean, is Pickwick up there in terms of sentimental, closest to home you can possibly get special lakes to win an Elite Series event for you?
Yeah, absolutely, Ronnie. I was telling a couple of the riders the other day, right after I won, back when I started my career in 2014, if you would have asked me what my weakness was in my fishing game, I would have told you it was ledge fishing. And I knew I had a gap to fill. And Pickwick Lake and Gunnersville Lake is where I went to kind of learn that and fill that gap. So, to do it on a lake that I've spent countless hours there in the summer, working on my game and understanding how fish relate to shell beds and main river ledges and secondary stuff. And yeah, to do it on a place like I love the whole Tennessee River, but honestly, even more so now than ever. But I would have told you before, Pickwick Lake is probably my favorite lake on the chain.
Brandon, just give us a little progression day to day of the tournament, because I think one of the most impressive things from a fan's perspective is typically in a 4-day tournament, although you didn't lead on day one, there's ebbs and flows. You have highs and lows. It seemed like you just kept your foot on the gas the entire tournament and never really gave anybody that leeway to make a jump. Just give us an idea of like the progression of your 4 days.
Yeah, so definitely the biggest key to this event for me was having that starting spot. That was obviously a very special spot, and being able, dude, every morning in the first 30 minutes, pretty much every day, I had at least 18 pounds. That's a big deal. A couple of the days, my entire bag came from that spot, and a couple of days I would, go cull throughout the day. But yeah, definitely having that real good starting spot, and then having the time each day to go look around for new places and see if new schools were showing up in different places. That was a huge key.
So you don't know a spot is special until you start catching them. And so for you, graphing over that spot or graphing near that spot in practice and maybe seeing 6 to 10 dots, normally on the Tennessee River, when you idle over a spot, there's about 277 bass. You're like, this is a special spot. But sometimes also on the Tennessee River, there's like no in between. It's either 277 bass and it's special, or there's 6 or 8 dots and you're like, these are probably big ones. And so for you, it was a lot shallower than anyone probably expected, but we've seen Greg Hackney win in June on Pickwick off of places in the blue, places that aren't necessarily mapped well and that are off the beaten path. For you, it's a popular area, but in practice, I know it was the final day when you found it. Did you realize it was as special as it could be until, day one making casts?
No, I did not. I kind of had an idea because it was shallower. I knew it's so hard to find anything off to yourself, even if it is a shallow spot. I kind of had a feeling somebody else would have found it. I just got fortunate and nobody else did find it. It was not a spot that really stuck out on the map. It was just a small place, probably 3 times the size of my boat, just a little clean spot that those fish sat on. But man, it was so cool the way that it worked out. And I've kind of learned over the past few years, the Tennessee River, everybody looks for that 12 to 20 foot. That seems to be the key depth range where everybody looks for those schools. But the way to find that sneaky stuff anymore is either look deeper than most people are looking or look shallower than most people are looking. And a lot of times those shallow fish, you have to find them either on your side scan, which is what I did, or you have to find them actually just covering water fishing for them.
So explain that spot to the fans at home, because we talked about it on Bass Live that it was, maybe 4 to 12 feet. And it obviously isn't too far from an immediate drop in depth and be able to have deep water nearby. But why were so many fish coming to that spot? It's obviously a clean spot. You said about 3 times the size of your boat, but what would make fish stop there? Because that's kind of the thing that a lot of fans and fishermen lose track of. They're on the bank in the spring, or they're on the shallow bars and ledges in the spring, and then they just think that they go straight out to the depths, whereas that could be a month-long or a 2-week-long stopping spot for a big percentage of fish that were shallow in that region. So why do you think that was such a good stopping spot, other than the fact that it was clean in nature? I mean, there could be a bunch of areas on the bars that just randomly hold fish, but for that many fish to keep showing up as well was a key.
Right. So the first thing is, the reason I think it kept reloading, this is a really popular part of the lake. There's a lot of big tournaments won in this part of the lake. It's that area just upriver from the Natchez Trace Bridge. Last time we were there, the year it was flooded, I think Pipkins and one of the Johnson brothers almost won off of that little island, and then those docks right in there. So that is a really good area. And the spot was actually probably within 200 yards of the main river channel. And what it was, on the backside of the river channel, there was a secondary bar that came up through there, and it just made a little corner right on the edge of that bar. And it came up out of about 8 feet of water and rolled up to about 4 feet on top. Well, what you got to understand is, over the years of current rolling up on these high spots, it creates a hard spot right there on that lip. And that's where mussel beds will form on the Tennessee River. That's the juice. That's what holds those fish. And that's why that spot kept replenishing. I mean, it's a feeding spot. It's where they go. And it seemed to be better in the morning for sure, obviously. But that's why it was as special as what it was. And there's 2 or 3 little places right in that area. There's two or three little spots that they'll get on right in there. I was talking to Justin Atkins about it, and he was like, man, he said, I can't believe I missed those fish because they're usually about 150 or 200 yards over on this other little spot. And they may have gotten pushed. You know, they may have gotten some pressure from a tournament that was there the week before. I'm not sure, but that's what made it special.
Now, Brandon, talk about that a little bit. Obviously, when I heard that you had basically these spots to yourself, that was pretty crazy to me because all my on the water coverage was basically covering guys that had people on them. So when I heard that initially, it was a little surprising. So in practice, did you dedicate most of your time to try to find those spots where, you know, most people would overlook, or did you spend some time on the pretty obvious main river stuff as well?
The first 2 days, I looked at a lot of the obvious stuff because obviously, you know, spending time on Pickwick, I knew a lot of the places where I thought they were going to be, but I knew that these guys would find those places too. I mean, every guy on the Elite Series knows what to look for when he goes to a ledge fishing tournament. So yeah, that third day of practice, I told myself I was going to go that. I realized once I got upriver from Bear Creek up toward the Natchez Trace Bridge and even further up the river, I started seeing less and less competitors' boats in practice. So I told myself that third day I was going to look around in that area and see if I could find some more stuff, you know, and just idle some stuff that didn't really stick out on the map, some stuff that I had never even looked at before. And thankfully I found that spot.
Brandon, I think that we talked about this on Bass Live. You had a late boat draw on day one, I do believe. And so honestly, you got the best unlock the lake of any pro in the field because you got to go by everyone after they had already pulled up to their starting spot, and you got to see which offshore spots and which ledges were covered up already, which kind of gave you an intel of maybe a couple. You're like, probably made mental notes. That spot doesn't have a boat on it yet. Maybe it'll be a midday thing. Maybe it'll be a second spot for somebody. And then for obviously the relief to pull up to that spot and to have it to yourself is awesome. And then also at the end of that, discuss, you know, take the whole strategy of driving and realizing what you had to yourself. But then also the bait selection. I was so excited to hear you were throwing a big crankbait and a big jig. And then I knew at some point you'd pull a spinning rod out and you just went to, I mean, you just started whipping and snapping the butts of the elite pros with the spinning rod. And so talk about those two things about kind of evaluating your game plan on the way to your first spot for that 30-minute run. And then obviously the baits that you chose when you were there.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a lot of strategy involved in a ledge fishing tournament. And that's part of the game is watching those places and seeing what's getting pounded, what's not getting pounded, what spots haven't been hit for the past couple hours, because a lot of these places you almost can't fish them out. I mean, especially those main river ledges, they're feeding spots. They got fish pulling in and pulling out all the time. So if you can find one that hadn't been hit in the past couple hours, a lot of times you can pull up and do really well. But as far as baits go, man, I've done enough ledge fishing the past few years to know you better be leaving the dock every morning with 10 or 12 different baits tied on. You got to be ready. If they come up blowing up on big gizzard shad, you better be ready with some kind of a swim bait. If they're down there and they're just in a foul mood and they don't want to bite, you better have some kind of a finesse presentation. You know, if there's a ton of white bass on the spot, something that y'all probably saw me do, I'll take a crankbait, fire those white bass up, and then fire a worm in there and try to single out the largemouth in the school, because those white bass don't really trigger on something unless it's moving real fast. Where a largemouth, if you'll get them whites going, then throw a worm in there, a lot of times you'll catch a largemouth. So yeah, I was definitely not bragging or anything like that, but I'm proud of the decisions I made as far as bait changes and stuff like that. I feel like I did well in that format for sure.
Now, give us this is the last thing I've got for you, because I don't want to take too much of your beach time. I'm just surprised
you're fine.
We even got any of your time to start with, because Kimberly was in the media trailer before the last day's weigh-in saying she was not taking anybody's calls. So I'm just happy we're here to start with. But give us a recollection of that last 6-pounder you caught on the final day, just your emotions. I mean, when I got to watch that, obviously it gave me chills. Just give me the full rundown of that catch.
Yeah, so every day I went out with this goal after having that good start the first day I went out with a goal every day at 20 pounds, 20 pounds. I just felt like in my heart, if I could close it out the rest of the week with at least 20 pounds, that I would do my job and get the win. And that's a tall order. That's a real tall order. So that last day, I started out, I think by 7:51, I had probably 18
Yeah.
pounds. Probably 18 pounds in the boat, you know.
And
I mean,
we
it
were
was
losing our mind on Bass Live because 30 minutes of the 51 minutes it took you from takeoff, 30 minutes was running, and we're like, oh
That's
yeah,
exactly
it's
right.
quickest limit of the week. Well, it only took you like 10 casts.
It was phenomenal. But anyway, I knew I wasn't up to my 20-pound goal yet. You know, looking back, I had the tournament won, but I wanted to slam the door. I wanted all the doubt out of my mind. So it's about 115. You know, I've worked my way up to maybe 18 and a half, 19 pounds. I'm like, man, if I could catch a 6-pounder, I literally had that in my mind. I was like, if I can catch a 6-pounder, I'm pretty sure it'll shut the door. And I pull up to a secondary spot that I had found that they just showed up on it on day 3 out of the blue. I idled over it and I saw 7 or 8 of them. I made a couple calls there late on day 3, rolled up to it about 115 on day 4. I caught a couple on a crankbait, and I had a big 3/4 ounce scrounger tied on, which is a very typical ledge bait on the Tennessee River. I fired it out there. I had saw one come up blowing up on a big gizzard shad. So I fired it out there and I'm reeling it along and it just locks up. And I set the hook and I couldn't tell if it was a big one for a second. I saw it come up and I saw the size of it. And I was like, that's it. That's my tournament right there. And man, that was I will never forget that fish catch as long as I live. I can just remember thinking that's it. That's my tournament. And I pretty much knew at that point it would take a monster bag to beat me, a bigger bag than we had seen all week.
Brandon, Kyle and I both know that is what dreams are made of for every 5 or 6-year-old kid, that when I have a chance to win an Elite Series event, I want to hook up with a fish and say that out loud. And I know you didn't purposely do that, but have that reaction of, this is the fish that's going to win me the turn. I just had a chill go over my body because this is the bass that's going to seal the deal. And you don't even know what anyone else is doing. Cody Huff can have 32 pounds on the Tennessee River. You don't know, but in your heart of hearts, in your gut, you're like, this is the fish that's going to pave the way for the rest of the day to win this event. After 9 years of being on the Elite Series and no Elite Series wins, winning an Open this year is huge. But really, you said this has been brewing since you were 5 years old, 4 years old, since you caught your first bass and fell in love with fishing. That's a lot of years worth of memories built into one hook set and one fish catch.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you guys saw more emotion out of me on that fish catch than you've ever seen in my entire career, man. I don't show a ton of emotion. I'm a pretty quiet guy. I hope nobody ever thinks that I'm not a nice guy because of that, because I definitely try to get along with everybody and I love everybody, but I'm just pretty quiet. That's just my nature. But man, when I caught that fish, there was no bottling up that emotion. I mean, I got pretty jacked up about that one for sure.
What's wild, Brandon, is you don't know this obviously because you were fishing, but you lost one like the cast before, and it was like the first fish you lost all week, and it was inconsequential, like a 2-pounder, and you didn't need it. But then you catch that one and we're like, oh, okay, he's back. There's no doubt he's going to win this event now. And the next 25 minutes, Cody Huff landed 5 4-pounders. Like, he called his whole entire bag out the next 20 minutes. And I told Tommy Sanders, I said, this is the most anticlimactic 20-pound bag someone's caught, because we just sealed the tournament 5 minutes ago. And now he goes on his run, which obviously his run gained him thousands of dollars, getting second place. But it is very cool to see it go down that way. It's a long time coming, but nobody hates Brandon Lester. There's no one who hates Brandon Lester, and they were all excited to see you win. How does that make you feel to be revered by a lot of the Elite Series fielder, if not all of them, and get the kudos you deserve? Because honestly, that's what we've been harping on a long time. Brandon Lester's the best that's on the list of guys to never win an Elite, and now you're off that list. You're a Bass millionaire. Congratulations for that. Let me hold $1. And then also now you're in the Angler of the Year race, and you're a 2-time winner this year. I mean, this is a great year for Brandon Lester. Every year is great, but this is super cool to see.
It really is, man. I appreciate it. Thank you. I really appreciate that. It's just getting off to that good start this year with that win down in the at the Open in Florida. definitely calmed me down a lot, took away the stress of trying to make the classic and all that. And honestly, I'm glad that I realize in fishing, here's the thing you have to realize. You're never going to stop learning. I don't care if you're Rick Clunn or if you're a rookie. It doesn't matter. This game is ever changing. You're always learning. And I feel like I'm at a good place with my fishing, but I still work on it a lot. I still fish a lot when I'm home. I still watch a lot of videos. I still try to pick up little things, and I tinker with baits. And, I'm just a student of the game, man. I just love it. I just love fishing. I do. I hope I always keep that love for it. It hadn't went away yet, and I've had it since the first time I ever caught my first fish when I was 4 or 5 years old, or however old I was. So I don't guess it's going to go away anytime soon. But yeah, I just love this game, man. I do.
So Brandon, I lied to you. I got one more. So obviously people will get to see this in the Tackle Tip Tuesday today, on Tuesday, obviously. But tell me a little bit about the Nico rig. Over a drop shot, a shaky head, a big worm. I think that's maybe something that the majority of the field, at least that I saw, didn't really do. Tell me a little bit about that. I know you've already told me specifically, but talk to the people out there about why that bait, was so crucial for you.
Yeah, honestly, a Nico rig is a Tennessee. There's been a lot of money won on a Nico on the Tennessee River the past several years, and I probably could have caught some of those fish on a drop shot or a big worm or something like that. But that Nico, I feel like it's a lot more natural. If you'll ever take sometime, if you have access to a swimming pool or a clear body of water near your house, rig up a shaky head, rig up a drop shot, and rig up a Nico, and look at how different the action is. A lot of people think a shaky head and a Nico are not that much different, but the action is totally different. The way the worm sinks is about the same, but the action when you pull on the worm is totally different, because on a shaky head, you're pulling from the head of the bait. So the worm doesn't get as much action. When you pull on that Nico worm, it's pulling from the center of the bait, and it really gives that bait that pulsing action. And makes it look alive. It looks a lot like a night crawler or something like that. And that particular worm that I was throwing, that Maxent Berkeley Mag hit worm, I'm not sponsored by Berkeley in any way, shape, or form, but that Maxent, I'm a believer in it. Me and John Cox stayed together last week. Obviously, you know how much he believes in the Maxent, and he made a believer out of me too. I mean, I've thrown it a lot the past few years and won a lot of money on it. It's a great worm.
And just for what it's worth, Tackle Warehouse is already sold out. I already checked. Thanks a lot, Brandon.
Well, don't forget about Midway USA. They may have some. I think I looked this morning, though. I think they're sold out too.
Yeah. Right. Well, I saw your $12,000 Midway USA order on your YouTube video earlier this year. I think you bought all the hitworms earlier that year, but 1,200. Well, you might have a $12,000 order coming up. You got right. Some money for it. I will say I was eating last night with my wife. We had chicken and macaroni and cheese, and then she had steamed green beans. And I got one steamed green bean that dang sure looked like a hitworm. It didn't taste like a hitworm, but I was like, man, I'm missing Brandon Lester hooking some big ones on this Monday night. But Brandon, kudos to you. Congratulations on the win. We appreciate you taking the time. Go enjoy the sun for us. I know you got plenty of sun at Pickwick, but this is a different kind of sun. Enjoy it with your family. You have one of the best cheering sections and supporters. I mean, you could be in 65th. It's not frequent that you're 65th, but you could be in 65th, and Miss Kim would be, all of them would be like, why isn't he on camera? I just want to see my boy fish. And I said, well, I would love to see him fish too. We've obviously seen your skill over the years. What's cool is I got to start my career at Bass your rookie year. So I got to see, bright-faced, young, 25-year-old Brandon Lester, and to now rugged old grizzly 35-year-old Brandon Lester. But just like on Kentucky Lake a few years ago, you're still whooping people on the Nico rig and catching a ton of bass. So thanks for your time, man. And we appreciate you hopping in and for being on our fantasy teams this week. It was huge for us.
Absolutely. I'm going to go down here and enjoy a day on the beach, but I appreciate you guys having me on. Awesome. Man, I'm glad to do it. Thank y'all. I appreciate it.
Brandon Lester, 2022 Bassmaster Elite Series champion at Pickwick. We thank you for your time. Kyle, what a great time to talk to Brandon, to be able to get his insight on his fishing spots, on some of the baits, and honestly what it means to him to win an elite event. I mean, I didn't know if he was going to punch a hole through a wall out of excitement or cry his eyes out, a mixture of both. I know I shed some tears watching the weigh-in from afar. I always do when the winner happens and that winner moment happens. But I also know how, if you've been with a guy when he's had a hand on a 6-pounder and he lost it, we were covering that on Bass Live. And I mean, Davey Height iconically slammed his hands on the fist in shock and was like, "Oh, sorry." But that was the 6-pounder that would have won him that event. And to see him grab that 6-pounder at Pickwick and to win that event this time, 2 different species, a long way from each other. But man, that seemed like some kind of poetic justice.
Yeah. And like you mentioned, I mean, it goes without saying how happy everybody was for Brandon. And that just says a lot about him. I don't think there's a single person on the entire Elite Series. Actually, I'm certain that doesn't like Brandon Lester and that wasn't happy for him. Naturally, all the guys are competitive and they want to win. They don't want anybody else to win. But I think everybody could look back at that weigh-in and, like you said, know that Brandon has paid his dues, has been as consistent as anybody out there. And I think, like you said, I think everybody was just happy to see him win. And ironically, I meant to text you this the other day, but the first person I ever covered on the water by myself was Brandon Lester in your boat at Douglas Lake, if you remember that.
That's right.
The Open. So that was the first time I ever did on the water coverage, and that was nearly 5 years ago now. And got to cover Brandon Lester, and ever since have been buddies with him, and obviously rooted for him just like anybody else. But yeah, super excited for Brandon, and like you at the weigh-in, it was emotional for me, and I'm not even involved in it as far as him winning, but you feel like you are because you get to know somebody for that long, and it's definitely really special. And congratulations again to Brandon.
Well, it's cool because you get the in-person aspect of it. You get to see the family reaction and the support and them showing up, probably walking around the media trailer a little bit nervous. They got their seats reserved out for the weigh-in, waiting for it to all start up. And I'm on the other side of it where we're doing Bass Live, but I'm getting texts from them. Heading into church with my hubby having 19 pounds feels real good, and then I'm leaving church headed to Pickwick. And that's what Kim, his wife, was texting. His mom was dropping all kinds of old stories about him and his grandpa fishing at Pickwick. He had if you're a bass fisherman, your dad or your grandpa has stopped in and pulled you out of class because you weren't feeling good to go catch some bass that evening. And that's what he got to experience. And he did it on Pickwick with his grandfather, which is cool. So a lot of cool stories from Brandon Lester. And honestly, looking back at our champions, there's never a year where we have bad champions, but it's very cool to see John Cruz win his second Elite after such a long time, and his impact on the industry and being a part of it in so many ways. Buddy Gross winning at Harris Chain the way he did. Very cool. Seeing Christie overcome his demons in the Classic and win it. Very cool. Drew Cook doing it his way, sight fishing, so awesome. Then you see Christie do it again at Chickamauga in come from behind fashion in an aspect that he started way down the leaderboard to start the event. And then Lee Livesey at Lake Fork to win as a home field guy is very cool. And to do it twice is awesome. Lester joins that group of, I guess, our Mount Rushmore this season of winners. Super cool to see him win. One of my favorite guys. And I mentioned it on the podcast last week. I think I wanted to pick him for all my fantasy teams. I had him on Drain the Lake, but I wanted to pick him on Rapala. But the weird part of it is I didn't pick him because I picked him at Lake Fork, and I didn't want to pick him back-to-back weeks in Rapala and look like I was just picking the same guy every week. And so I didn't, and he wins the event. So very cool for Lester. But any final thoughts about the tournament aspect before we move on?
Really, I've got a funny story for you, and it won't take very long. But you mentioned Kim being in the being in the media trailer, being nervous. It was actually, I'll tell on her a little bit. It was actually kind of the opposite, because I think they truly deep down felt the same way everybody else did, that it was over, and it was. Yeah. It obviously, like, it was insurpassable, really, if we're being honest. No,
my husband beat him down.
That was not the case at all. You could just tell how excited and truly, like, just anxious she was for that moment, because obviously, as long as Brandon's waited for that moment, she's also, like you said, waited that long for that moment, because she's been his biggest supporter, biggest fan for, however long. And it was really, really cool to see her reaction. But I was this close, and Mercer was going to offer me money to do this if I did it, but I didn't, because I didn't have the heart to.
Cody Huff just caught a 9-pounder.
Yes, I was literally going to just yell, like, in complete excitement, Cody Huff just got a 10-pounder. And I told everybody that after she walked out, and they were like, why did you? I have more of a heart than that. I can't do that. I was like, I'm happy as she is for him. I'm not about to get her to hate me for no reason, but I just had to tell you that story because I felt like that was something you would do as well. Just a joke.
Oh, no doubt. You got it. When you see the family's emotions, they'll believe anything. They'll believe, did you hear that they pulled so much water, Brandon got sucked through the dam, 20 miles away? They'll believe what, or I just heard his fuel gauge isn't working. And then they'll be like, because that is, as a Bass employee and a tournament coverage person, they think that we definitely have the intel they may not have, and we do at times, but we can twist that and get their attention real quick. But that's hilarious. They're awesome. And like she said on stage, she's been with Lester since they were in high school. They, obviously they both were married to other people early in life, but they've both found their way back to each other as being just high school sweethearts. So super cool to see the Lester family and Clay Dyer and that aspect of his family, his mom, and obviously Clay is his father-in-law, and Jimmy being his dad and everything like that. So very cool for the Lesters in general. Let's get into a little bit of talk about 2nd through 5th, and then some fantasy fishing before we wrap it up. Cody Huff, Chris Zaldain, Jacob Fouts, and John Cox were our top 5. And look at the arrangement there. Chris Zaldain came back on the final day, moved up into 3rd place. Meanwhile, Cody Huff and Jacob Fouts had been on camera all week, 2 rookies for the Tennessee River. Then we get to see John Cox fishing shallow in Bay Springs and making it work. Like, think about that. The fact that the quality of fish in Bay Springs Lake allowed an angler to get 5th on the Elite Series at Pickwick during the Tennessee River in the summer. That's super cool. And we'll definitely get into that aspect of it, but that's your top 5. Very cool. And just, diverse group of guys doing a lot of different things.
No doubt. I mean, it's just John Cox being John Cox. That's the one thing of the tournament. Granted, obviously you always want to see the winner, but I would have loved to have covered John Cox in some form or fashion during the tournament, just because it's like almost hard to believe that he was able to do what he did in a tournament where obviously offshore ledge fishing and just offshore fishing in general is the deal. To finish 5th place, I mean, that just speaks volumes of how talented he is doing what he does. But no, I covered Bill Owen on day 1 of the tournament, obviously the previous champion at Pickwick, and he gave an offshore spot about 35 seconds, and then he went to the bank as well, and he ended up catching some fish. And I said, man, it's June. There's obviously a massive mayfly hatch that was talked about, I'm sure, a decent bit because they were everywhere. Potential bluegill spawn. There's still a lot of things going on up shallow, but
you definitely got to make it. You got to maximize it for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. You're just not going to get the bites. The number of bites, the number of fish just aren't there. I mean, it's just reality. I mean, from fishing in the summertime shallow, I mean, there's definitely quality of fish to be caught there, but making that last for 4 days is just super impressive. And then, like you said, when you look at the rest of the top 4 above John Cox, 2 former college anglers. Obviously, we got to know, we have known for a long time. I fished against both of them in college. Can't say anything there.
I'm sorry.
I have nothing positive to say about that, unless you're Cody or Jacob. But obviously, good to see Cody Huff break out. We talked about that on the fantasy podcast a little bit before the tournament, as we both felt like Lake Fork or this tournament were going to be the tournaments that Cody Huff would break out, and to see him doing it with the big spoon like we saw him do in the college national championship at 10 killer. Little different scenario, I guess, but same general bait and things of that nature. And then Chris Zaldain, obviously just doing what Chris Zaldain does. I mean, throwing a big swim bait, obviously a new prototype, looks pretty cool. I mean, seeing what he was able to do and just put his head down and, grind out with a big swim bait. I mean, that was really cool as well. Really just a lot of interesting storylines in the top 10, really.
Yeah, we mentioned it on Bass Live. I said, man, Tommy, Cody Huff with a spoon is dangerous. He won 10 killer with a jigging spoon, vertically doing it on an end of docks. Then he goes and wins Toledo Bend College Regional in the timber, doing that with a small spoon as well. Goes and wins a Toyota Series the next week doing the same thing. And then obviously this week doing so well with a big spoon. We saw, I was in the college event when the Magnum spoon, the Nichols Mag spoon, was debuted. Ben Parker really good friends with a couple of the Bethel anglers because he's from that Kentucky Lake region. He gave them a couple of the mag spoons. They go down to Pickwick, and the first tournament in the national scene used, we got to see them dominate. We were fishing for like fourth. We were not fishing for first because that was a different breed. I mean, you're showing fish, big groups of fish when they still grouped up huge schools of big ones at Pickwick. You're showing them a bait they've never seen. Now we're seeing a different deal. And I talked about it on Bass Live a little bit, but that Dixie Jet Talon spoon that Huff used and then Huff gave to Fouts to use had 3 hooks on it, looked very aggressive, and people were like, we're going to need some regulations on number of hooks. It's got the same number of hooks as a 110. It's got the same number of hooks as a spook.
Super spook.
Yeah, it's got the same, and the fish get hooked as bad as they do there when they miss it. They get hooked in the top of the head all the time and things like that. So we'll have to, reevaluate that discussion because people get so caught off guard by brand new baits. And so same thing. I think there was a Chris Zaldain catch where, you can see his rod tip thump and he sets the hook and it comes in like underneath the gills and gets hooked. And people were giving him a hard time on social media for that. But how many times, I mean, have you ever seen an underwater bass shot of them biting or swiping, sucking in a thing? There are times that fish, I don't believe that they just do this during the spawn, but close their mouth and hit a bait to stun it, and they're not even opened mouth trying to eat it. They're just trying to get it away from them. Or you've made the same cast 10 times in a row and it's annoying and they're just trying to get it away. And then you hook them outside the mouth. I mean, when you're fishing in 15 to 20 feet of water and you can't visibly see them, yes, there's live scope, but I challenge anyone who's never used live scope, please put that on your boat. I will buy it. I will buy it and I will do a segment called Embarrass Your Skill and take you out there and see if you can snag fish without just using a 1 ounce weight and a treble. I mean, it's very difficult to snag fish purposely on camera while hiding it. So all of that discussion out the window, that's for another time. Possibly we'll do that with the same segment we did with Matt Airy talking about sharing water with people. Those will be the 2 controversial points we'll talk about there. But overall, we saw a lot of different baits from guys, 10XDs, big spoons, big swim baits, and then a little Nico rig whooped their tail on the final 2 or 3 days.
The top lures gallery is up right now. It just went up while we were on this podcast. And I definitely would tell everybody to go look at that because I built the gallery last night and I was just amazed at some of the baits in that gallery. Naturally, ledge fishing is always going to be a rotation of baits deal. It's not a matter of, just picking up one bait and just throwing it all day normally. But, to go back to what you were saying about the hooking fish on the outside of the mouth, I don't know who it was. It might have been Zaldain talking about it on camera. Maybe you can attest to this, but that's the truth of the matter. I mean, gizzard shad are big. Gizzard shad are not like your normal, just little,
when you see a bass eat a bait and then it's gone and right then they turn. This is like,
they attack it. They have to attack it.
I'm going to eat a T-bone without cutting it, kind of thing.
Right. I mean, like the aggressiveness of a bass to eat a big threadfin shad. I mean, you got to think about it with those big spoons. I mean, you're talking about those things being 8-9 inches long. They're big spoons. It's not like a fish, even a 5 to 7 pounder, is just going to go inhale a spoon that big. They go up to destroy it, just like they would a big gizzard shad. And sometimes the consequences that you're going to hook them on the outside of the mouth. It's no different than if you're throwing a deep diving crankbait. A lot of times the same thing will happen. I mean, it's not all that uncommon to hook one outside of the mouth on a deep diving crankbait. It's not because you snagged it. It's because the fish comes up and once again tries to attack the bait and just gets it on the outside of the mouth. So yeah, I didn't get to see a whole lot of the controversy. I didn't really pay much attention, nor will I. But yeah, I definitely think that that's overstated if that was the case.
Yeah, and I think I don't want to use it as my ranting platform. We could talk about live scope with some of the best anglers and the forward facing sonar, the Mega Lives and things like that, the active targets, just to name all of the brands, since we have to make sure we do that. All of the forward facing sonars. We'll talk with some of the guys maybe in a future episode this summer when they're in between events. Some of the best in the world at doing that and kind of getting a good episode about it. That'll probably get a lot of views, Kyle. But I remember my first 10XD catch at Pickwick. It was not far from Brandon Polnick's areas in the Waterloo region. And I was like, biggin', son, this is what 10XDs are made of. And it was a 2-pounder hooked in the top of the head. And I'm like, what the heck? And it's because sometimes when they are lethargic or the way they're positioned, you're grinding that bait down there and I mean, they're like the Pee Wee kid not set up to be a linebacker, and Derrick Henry runs through the line in high school and just runs them over. I mean, they can't avoid it. And so, or like you say, they go over there and they swat at it and they get hooked. So we see the same thing. Sometimes you catch a fish. I think Skylar Hamilton told me that his biggest fish of the week at Lake Fork, it was a, like, I don't know, 6 or 7 pounder caught in the butthole on a topwater. And it blew up on it, and he sets the hook and it's in the butthole. And he's like, how the heck is that possible? They just have bad aim sometimes. I digress. John Cox, he's kind of the story for me because I've got texts. Let me see if I can pull it up while I'm talking. I've got text when it comes to, let me see where he's at. Of after Fork, I texted the top 3 in the Angler of the Year, their little image of where they were position wise. And he said, man, I've got to get through Pickwick and then he sends another text, going to be hard to catch back up. Another text to that guy, Brandon Polinick, LOL. And so he obviously had it on his mind that he was only 20 points. But if you're anyone else in the world, you're 20 points behind in Angler of the Year, half of the year. You're like, I've got a shot. And he said, man, I've got to catch back up, as if he had done something bad, because we know how dangerous Brandon is in the summertime. But John does it his way. And what an impressive event, going to Bay Springs Lake, making it last for 4 days, catching 5th place weight. He was 33rd after day 1, Kyle. And I covered this in the Mercury move of the tournament for Pickwick. 33rd after day 1 with only 15 and change. On day 2, with about 2 hours left in the day, before he really had to make his 30-minute run back, he was like 65th on Bass Track. Didn't have a limit, didn't have good weight, catches a couple big ones at the end of the day, jumps inside the cut, so much so that he's 5th place. He had 22 pounds on day 2, and he never left the top 10 after that. So for John Cox to survive shallow and to thrive shallow and actually gain 2 points on Brandon Polinick, I mean, it's a race, because everyone else is now 50 points or more behind from 3rd on down. And now Lester's made his name known. He's in 4th, right behind David Mullins.
Yeah, and I think, something I was talking with my boater about a good bit during the tournament, when you saw John Cox jump up into the top 10, have obviously an incredible tournament, is the fact that I think everybody's guilty of this a little bit. You feel like you have to do whatever the deal is, right? So you get stuck in a mindset of like, if it's the summertime, you have to go fish deep offshore, or, if it's the wintertime, you have to go live scope fish up. You have to do whatever the deal is that's going to win. But the reality of it is, like, going against the grain like that, like, I'm not saying it works for everybody. It's definitely not worked for me plenty of times. I'm sure you as well. But like, that just proves to you, like, the younger generations and then the kids that are learning to tournament fish. I think that's a great example of, you don't always have to do what Doc Talk says you have to do. I mean, if you're more confident doing something else, whatever it may be, it doesn't even have to be fishing deep, or shallow. I mean, maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it's the springtime and you love fishing deep. Like, there's like almost always an alternative way to do things tournament fishing. I'm not saying you're always going to win doing that, because in tournament like this, obviously, ledge fishing was definitely the deal. But to finish 5th place against 90 some odd guys,
91.
Yeah, 91 guys doing basically the opposite of what you're doing. And I'm not saying they were all ledge fishing. I saw some other guys were definitely fishing shallow, but that's just a great example. And I think that, once again, for youth fishermen that are getting, started in tournament fishing, that's a great example to know that just because you think, somebody's going to catch them a certain way, or it's going to be one a certain way, if you have more confidence doing it a different way, do that. Like, that's going to get you further in tournament fishing than trying to fish somebody else's strengths on, a tournament where you're just not confident doing that. And I mean, eventually you have to be versatile, like Brandon Lester, like you were talking about earlier, is good at doing just about everything. Same with Polinick, same with a lot of these guys. But, as far as, when you're young, learning to tournament fish, that's a huge example to learn from, because I think so often, and I think everybody's guilty of it, you just get stuck in the mindset of thinking you have to fish one way because that's the way to catch them, and that's almost never the case.
That's the worst thing ever. I've actually been on Pickwick fishing offshore, and I've muttered, man, I would have already caught 3 or 4 fish on chatterbait. This is stupid. What am I doing? And so that's the last thing John Cox wants to do, is go sit on a ledge and be like, I could have caught 10 pounds on a wacky rig already, and I'm not even going to catch 10 pounds today out here. Even though he's caught them deep, I think, once in his life. But also the opposite end of the spectrum, the first event that came to my mind was Lake Conroe for the Classic. I mean, there were 7 to 10 pounders on the bed. There was a shad spawn going on. There's a white swim jig bite going on, and Jordan Lee catches them off the end of a point to win the Classic. So it's the opposite, where, the pressure to be on the bank for the pre-spawn or the spawn, yet he is off the bank and wins that event. There's just certain lakes and certain places that you can do that. I think Pickwick's a great place. We mentioned it, talking about the college event that was there the week before, previewing the event, that you can catch them shallow and normally do decent, but you can't maybe win the event, or you peter out on day 3, unless you're probably John Cox. Or we didn't even discuss this, unless you go to a lake that's got 5 other people fishing it. He had water to himself. And so that's a key deal, is having fresh water or having used water, but you're the only one using it, and you get to go back. And so you're fishing against yourself. I got to outfish myself, because I caught 2 fish there earlier. I could come back this afternoon and catch some because it's a brim bed, whatever the deal might be. So kudos to John Cox making it. We mentioned Jacob Fouts a little bit, also big worm and a 10XD. That's just if I had to recommend to anybody fishing the Tennessee River that's never fished offshore, get a 10-inch worm, whether it's Texas rig or Carolina rig. Get a big crankbait, whether it's a 6XD, 8XD, 10XD, something like that. And then maybe, a drop shot or something like that, 3 different baits. I don't know if I'm not going to recommend a mag spoon to somebody, because that's a dang workout, but those are old school baits that work offshore, and man, they really work on the Tennessee River. So kudos to all those guys. And the top 10, Brandon Polnick making the top 10, rushing home. I saw Kyle Vandiver Monday night post, "Hey, does anybody in Montana have a chartered flight?" And I'm like, uh-oh, that means the baby, he got the call. So hopefully today we see a baby Polnick appear. Tiffany, such a trooper, allowing Brandon to stay and fish and to keep his dreams alive, to provide for their family, which is very cool, because that is an ebb and flow. You're like, you got to be there, but you don't want to miss it if you don't have to. There's a lot at stake. So a little bit more diaper money that he earned this week, and he's got a lot more points going towards a bigger diaper money at the end of the year for Progressive Angler of the Year. So that's the tournament. But the tournament within the tournament, Kyle, is Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing. And I can officially say the king is back. The king is back, baby, especially in a big way for Mercury Drain the Lake. Had a great week for my team. Had 7 of my 8 picks in the top 34 of the event. That is huge. I think the top 6 of my picks were in the top 25 or so, 26. And then obviously I think I had 4 or 5 in the top 15. So huge week for me. I moved up into the top 126 in the world, and I've got some people saved, and I am hoping that about 85 of the people in front of me have not saved some guys for the Northern Swing, because I've got some guys saved. That's the strategy aspect of it, and I'm hoping it works out well. But super good week there. And then for Rapala Bassmaster Fantasy Fishing, 4 of my 5 guys made the top 13. I had 3 fish in the final day. And obviously I had Brandon Lester and Drain the Lake. Did not have him for Rapala. I had Matt Airy, who finished 13th, but I think Cody Huff, Jacob Fouts, and Matt Robertson were my other picks for Rapala. And then Iconelli was my one that missed the cut there. And then I think in Drain the Lake, I used Atkins, Webster, Robertson, Lester. I used Mike Huff, but he was a bad finish for me. And then I think I had a few more, some guys for the Tennessee River. I can look it up if we need to, but yeah, great week for me. You had a great week. I think I won the Bass League for Drain the Lake as well. And I got second in Rapala for the Bass League. So I'm thrilled.
Really, all I have to say is welcome to the 90% or better. I mean, I've been holding it down all year for you, keeping your seat warm. But congratulations on a good.
Thank you.
Of course. Yeah, mine was okay. I my Rapala fantasy fishing, I had 3 guys in the top 20, all rallied on the third day and, second day and third day. So that was definitely good. Had Justin Atkins finish in the top 10. That was a major struggle for me, is because if you watched our previous shows, I had Brian Schmidt and changed it last minute, because it was one of those deals where I wasn't going to be fooled by not picking Justin Atkins in this tournament, because I felt like there was no way he wasn't going to catch him. And he did. 8th place finish, obviously did really well. Brian Schmidt still did a little bit better. Somehow, I don't know how that worked. Obviously, it wouldn't have made a huge difference as far as points go, but happy either way as far as Rapala fantasy fishing goes. Had two guys just outside the cut. Well, one guy in 57th, one in 68th. Clint Davis made a huge rally on day 2, which obviously helped my team. 68th place finish doesn't seem great, but when you go from low 80s or, low down in the standings and make a big jump, that definitely helps the team. Then Rapala Bassmaster Drain the Lake. I was also like you. I had a really good tournament. I'll tell you what's really starting to tick me off is the fact that I am 99.1%, 183rd in the country. When I saw that, I was like, oh, no doubt. I'm going to lead our group. I'm going to lead our fantasy group. I'm going to lead everything. I'm literally top 200 in the world. And I'm still like 3rd or 4th in every one of those groups. And I don't know how that's even possible. I'm starting to get a little frustrated there, but definitely really good as far as Drain the Lake go. Had Brandon Lester, had Matt Robertson, had Joseph Webster, had Justin Atkins, Canterbury, 24th place finish. Like you
and
had.
I think
that was
I think I had a Menendez and Mullins were huge for me on day 3 because Mullins was 47th on day 1, moved up to 42nd, and then he finished 16th. So that was huge move for him on day 3. And then Menendez, I think, finished 34th. And that was the one I was mentioning, 7 into the top 34. He was 34th. So he moved up a little bit as well. It's always good when you burn an angler in fantasy fishing by using him in an event. We say burn and like, it sounds like a negative, but when you use an angler, you want him to have done his best or did a great finish so that it's worthwhile. It was a good value pick. And to only have one guy miss the cut and really one guy finish below 34th, I will take it, except Mike Huff. If you would have finished 60th, bro, we would have won the world. But it was like an 80th something place finish, I think, for Huff. All's well that ends well. You always got to have a dud. It's back to the Ronnie, who's the king of fantasy fishing, deemed by Mark Zona, and I think Mark Zona only. And now I've kind of taken it on as myself. But I'm back to my old ways where I post my lineup and I say, here's my team for the week. Beware, because one of you guys are screwed because one of you guys are going to bomb instead of half the team doing bad. One of you guys is going to bomb, and one guy from each team did bomb, but it makes sense. 2 of my best events this year, Hartwell and Pickwick, 2 bodies of water I know by far better than any other body of water. I know what's going to go on. I know what's going to happen. I know the regions of the lake that they're going to catch them in. So I was so thrilled to see me back up my knowledge and my smack talk with actually good picks. So I'm proud of myself. We'll just use that as the excitement for the week. So I know people are probably tired of hearing me brag about it because they hear it on Bass Live. But you know what? When you've been dubbed, that's your responsibility. That's my responsibility, good or bad.
Yeah, well, I tell you this much, as not even regarding fantasy fishing. I'm just saying this regarding just Southern tournaments in general. I'm definitely glad that we're going north coming up because it is starting to get hot down here in the South. And as well as I do in Arkansas and Alabama, pretty similar north and south, I guess locations, but it is starting to get really warm. I'm just really looking forward to a little cooler weather. I'm going to the college tournament at Saginaw Bay in Michigan, looking at the temperatures. The highs every day are in the 70s, which is nice. A huge relief. So once again, fantasy fishing was good for both of us. I think we are both in the same situation where, especially in Drain the Lake, we've got some guys set back that are going to do really well in the northern swing. And it's going to be interesting to see some of the big changes because obviously some of the people have done really well to this point have probably used up a lot of their anglers that will factor up north.
Yeah, honestly, I feel like Sam Pittman right now. We're just stacking all of those rivalry trophies beside of us. And the only thing we're missing is the national championship trophy, which is still in the realm of possibility for us. Somebody said this morning, you're roughly 1,200 points. You're 1,200 points behind the leader. No shot you can make up that. If I get the winner every single event, it is I have no idea with Drain the Lake who they have reserved left. So I said, you keep your pessimistic attitude and leave it at the front door because I have a chance to come back still. All our goals are still in front of us. You mentioned how hot it is. My windows are sweating right now. They are dripping with condensation, how humid it is. And I'm inside nice and cool. Kyle, we're going to get into it in the next episode. We're going to talk about our mid-season Falcon Rod's Rookie of the Year race. You know, it's a little past midseason now, 3 events left, but we had big shakeups at Pickwick, and we got to talk to one of our rookies as well. And so we'll promo that and be able to do that for next week's episode. But if you haven't listened in, listen into our last episode of the podcast. We just dropped it yesterday. It was the Pattern of the Month series we're doing for the month of June. We got to talk to Matt Airy, who has 4 Bassmaster finishes in the top 13 in the month of June, 1 per season for his years on the Elite. So, hey, it's a good feeling. I don't know if Matt knew this, but when you launch your boat in June in an elite event or a classic, and you know you're going to have a good finish because you're just good at June fishing, that's a good feeling to have. So that's our last episode, and our next episode will be Falcon Rod's Rookie of the Year preview. And I look forward to getting some aspects with you on that.
Yeah, absolutely. That'll be really interesting. And the Falcon Rod's Rookie of the Year, race is starting to heat up big time. So that's gonna get really interesting down the stretch. Obviously, guys like Jay Shakurat and some of these guys that are really good up north prove that in the Open. It's going to be really interesting to see how they do moving forward, you know, in the next few months of the season.
Exactly. Well, for Kyle, Jessie, I'm Ronnie Moore. That's episode 81 of the Inside Bassmaster Podcast. Big thanks to Brandon Lester for joining us today and being frank with us, being candid. I don't know if I've ever had a bad conversation with Brandon Lester. What a stellar human. What a great angler. Now rightfully deserved victory on the Elite Series. $1 million club. Let me hold $1, Kyle. But for this episode, we're signing off, and we'll see you in the next one. The rookie recap for midseason.